First-time founders focus on product. Second-time founders focus on distribution.
It's easier to build than ever before. Your last true moat is execution and distribution.
We should not lose sight over whom are we going to delight well enough that they're going to give us money. That's what matters.
Don't lose sight of you're a company that's solving X and your customer doesn't really give a shit what technology you're using.
A bunch of freshly minted CS PhDs would not take the same path we did. They would go do other very logical things, but they didn't have the practical battle scars about which the textbooks haven't yet been written. The lore that you have to say goodbye to your friends and family for 5 years to do a startup, just not true. I actually think it produces worse business outcomes. I had the privilege of joining when revenue was almost zero and there were 10 or 20 people in the ads business, and I was in the ads business. 3 years later, we were at 650 million in revenue and there were 500 people in the ads business. I have never been part of growth like that.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Hello, go-to-market leaders. If you're like me, you're probably feeling the AI FOMO. You're certainly not alone. And that's why HG Insights created the next generation of sales AI report to calm the FOMO and help you bring AI to your go-to-market teams. It includes a breakdown of the sales AI landscape, the adoption of Gen AI and sales software across different buyer groups, plus an analysis of the top 75 trending sales AI tools. And why HG Insights? Pretty simple. They've been writing market reports for years as the pioneer of tech adoption and market insights. And they are trusted by go-to-market leaders at the likes of Snowflake, Five9, Google Cloud to help improve go-to-market efficiency. So if you're thinking about AI for your sales team but unsure where to start, this free and ungated report has got you covered. Check out the link in the show notes. Now on with the show. Hello and welcome back to the GTM podcast. I have no idea what episode we are currently on, but it's getting up there. And thank you all for rocking with us every week. Super cool to see the continued journey and more people tuning in every month. We'll keep the good guests rolling. And I got an excellent one this week, and super excited to be hanging out with him. I am joined by Guy Yalif. Guy, welcome, man.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. Great to see you again.
Good to see you, man. Good to see you. We were hanging out in SF somewhat recently and finally convinced you to come on the pod. So excited to have you.
Excited to be here with you. You've got some great guests. I hope not to bring down the average too badly.
Let's get right into it, man. So I guess I should do a quick bio. I'd like to give a little bit of context for the listeners. So Guy Yalif is a very seasoned B2B SaaS executive, over 20 years of go-to-market experience. For the past 15 years, he has really excelled as a marketing leader, following a decade as a product leader. So really interesting kind of shift there. And then originally trained as an aerospace engineer. So I can't say we've had an aerospace engineer on the pod. So you are number one. So just really interesting about like combining this technical expertise with strategic business leadership. And that has converted to 4 successful B2B SaaS exits. You've worked at iconic companies like Microsoft, Yahoo, Twitter, and extensive experience, which is super relevant right now in real AI. And you've been engaging deeply in that field long before it became mainstream. And we all had ChatGPT, and it's every single article that we're all consuming now. But you are most recently also the co-founder and CEO of Intellimize, which was acquired by Webflow. So congratulations. And holds a degree of mechanical and aerospace engineering, which again, first time we've had it, and MBA from Stanford. But I got to dive right into AI because it's in your bio. It's right there. And you've been in this space, as I said, a long time. Are there some assumptions about AI that you think the majority of folks in go-to-market might be getting wrong?
I think a bunch. And, you keep mentioning AI. Isn't the line from, excuse me, aerospace, from aerospace to marketing? Like that's a straight line, right? That's a well-trodden path.
Very, very linear for
Yeah.
sure.
I think that even those of us that have seen multiple generations of tech changing the world are really watching the speed of this. And I think it is faster than anything we've seen before. But I hope none of us lose sight that it's a means to an end. The customer, they are true north. We should not lose sight over whom are we going to delight well enough that they're going to give us money. That's what matters. And focusing on that for our product and less on the competition and less on AI, in my humble opinion, is the place for us to go. And for our messaging, we would never say GTM now is an electricity company because you use electricity, or an internet company because you use the internet. I think in not too long, we won't say these are AI companies. And so I think that's one, really focus on what new use cases, what degrees of freedom does it enable you to do? One, two, is that all AI is what we're seeing right now. What we're seeing right now is, as we've heard, generative AI. There have been other kinds of AI. Intellimise happened to build one of these other kinds, predictive AI, that have been around forever, for as long as we've had, almost as long as we've had computers. And what's interesting is each is suited to different tasks. Generative AI it's based on stats. It's applied statistic. Well, that's not too helpful when you're using your accounting system, and you don't want probabilities, right? You need something to be deterministic every time. And so to choose the right tool for the job, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. I mean, I feel like anytime we have these big technological bumps, and it's funny you say internet companies, because like when the internet first came out, people were like, yeah, we're an internet company, right? And then
Totally. .com one.
blockchain was gonna, revolutionize the whole world. And then there's all these like blockchain companies, and it's like, don't lose sight of, no, you're a company that's solving X, and your customer doesn't really give a shit what technology you're using, if it's the internet, whether it's the blockchain, whether it's predictive or generative AI. It's like, what is the problem you're solving? And, yeah, I think that's a great a kind of comparison you said of like, we all use electricity every day. So are we all electricity companies at the core? But no, I like it. It was funny to, not funny, just interesting to see all of these recent VC AI funds, the $500 million AI fund, and all of this money getting raised on the premise of that. And, we kind of looked at it and we're like, that's just a software fund. Like every new software fund that's getting created has some form or elements, or will be using different versions of AI. So it's just the next natural evolution, which is interesting. But so something that stands out for me in kind of your background is you have 20 years of operator experience, 25 years of operating experience before starting Intellimise. And I think that there's this sort of idea in Silicon Valley, and it's perpetuated by the media, that startup founders are all super young, maybe straight out of college, hungry, engineers, hustlers, and that's the archetype for success. But at least from us in the 4 years of starting this fund, and knowing that we are focused on B2B software, I think consumer might be a little bit different, but we almost exclusively invest. And when you look at the data and the ones that have gone well and not as well, all these founders have lived or earned operating experience in a given sector, in a given category. They intimately know a problem well. And there's just so many lessons to learn. There's tribal knowledge in every sector. And it's really hard to solve problems for other businesses before living them yourself, which is, and there's outliers, but I guess, would you say that each stage of your operating journey better prepared you for ultimately the founder journey and a successful one?
To the extent that each step builds on the previous, very much so. And with humility, to your point about the previous operating experience, it's just a big set of mistakes, right? Like hopefully we make a new set in, leading a company and starting a company. And hopefully those battle scars help inform, like, where are you going to gold plate what you're doing and future proof it? Where are you going to duct tape and just get it done for today? And somewhere in between, I feel like in everything we do, from writing the code to marketing to sales process and more, that's a choice. And, hopefully also along the way, you've built a set of relationships that are, if all's going well, helping you do a better job meeting your customers where they are, because you can get the straight scoop from folks and have them tell you, no, that really does suck. Like that doesn't solve the problem, and that's gold. That feedback early on. And to your point, hopefully then you can do a felt experience job of problem identification rather than a logicking your way there. Both are valid, but you probably have a bit more muscle memory for the felt experience version of that journey.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I look at it, I think you put it a great way. It's just like those 20 years were just a series of mistakes, and you learn that and of course wins along the way. But you get to learn that essentially on someone else's dime, right? Like I'll just give a random example. If someone spent, the last 3 years trying to solve a problem at Klaviyo in, let's say, the e-commerce space, and they had a big team of people and, a big P&L for their business unit that they ran, and they spend all this time and money trying to solve a problem, and they kind of get close to it. And then things shift to Klaviyo and they're like, oh, I'm going to spin this out. You've just got like a bunch of basically free R&D before you ever invest. And it's basically just all the mistakes that they made before starting the journey.
So true. And hopefully, you're adding value along the way. And, that I can tell you that the previous managers would point out a bunch of those mistakes. But in particular for IntelliMize, my co-founders, Jin and Brian, whom I've had the privilege of knowing for 20 years, they led a several 100-person team that ran the predictive machine learning that personalized the Yahoo homepage. Back when that page mattered, back when it was the most popular page on the internet. Not that it doesn't matter now, but it's different, as we know. And that was learning that was incredibly expensive at scale, 100 million impressions a day, billion user profiles. Then they went and created Yahoo's content recommendation system. While what we built at IntelliMize does not equal either one of those things, one of the things that made us comfortable about the lead that we had in market was that a bunch of freshly minted CS PhDs would not take the same path we did. They would go do other very logical things, but they didn't have the practical battle scars about which the textbooks haven't yet been written to know, oh, wait, this path is much higher probability than that one. And we were like, great, they'll take that one for several years before they consider this one. To your point about some of the benefits of the previous mistakes.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to jump into your time at Yahoo a little bit more, but let's actually start at the beginning. So you started at BCG, I believe, and then you were an intern at Microsoft, and then you went to TradeWeave in the retail kind of SaaS space. What did you learn in those really early, those can be really formative years that, you pulled into success later in life?
At BCG, it was the classic, how to think, break down problems. The consulting mindset was quite helpful there. At Microsoft, there was, I won't get specific, but the ability to pay to play for some things that shouldn't be pay to play was eye-opening in terms of feedback folks would give. No shade on Microsoft. It was industry practice, nothing specific to Microsoft. And then TradeWeave, it's funny you call it SaaS, because back then we were like, we're doing this really cool thing. It's called a multi-tenanted hosted app, which today we would call SaaS, but back then the term wasn't a thing. And a big learning there, we were doing basically buying collaboration software in general merchandise and apparel department stores. Think Polo is selling to Macy's. And we would help bring transparency and planning preseason, midseason, and after the end of the season for these seasonal businesses. product worked, the CEOs of Polo and Macy's and Dillard's and Ralph and all these, like, they were in, and the founder of the company had relationships with all of them. That was great. They were super fired up. The users, the buyer, and the vendor, they did not want to use it. Why? Because it was transparent and they were used to lying to each other, and they made a lot of money off of that lying. And so there was a lot of margin to be had in the lying that they did, and that was industry practice. And this product got in the way of that. And so better understanding the user versus the buyer, which I guess in B2B SaaS, you're like, well, yes, of course, that's a buying committee. But in this case, they were really different people, right? One was the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company. The other one was a day-to-day buyer. Was humbling way to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it. We see that still all the time in SaaS, right? You look at an example like sales tech, where you know have all these analytics and reporting for maybe sales leadership, but then if you're actually using it, it's just adding more work to your workload. So there is always that disconnect. How do you coach people, and how do you now think about sort of closing that gap between the user and the buyer? Because you got to make the buyer happy. They're signing the check, they're signing the renewals, the cross sell, upsell. Do you have any sort of strategies for shortening that gap between the two and the expectations?
In my humble opinion, it's literally what you just said, which is ensuring that there is something in the user's self-interest that will make it better for them and makes their life easier, not harder. And it is as simple as that. So would we have started TradeWeave had we gone and talked to all of the other users, talked to the users and understood that? Maybe. Would we have changed how it was built? Almost certainly. To enable them to keep doing the things they wanted to do. Maybe we would have built in margin calculators so they can have their internal number and a separate external number, something like that to help address that need. To your point about sales management, it's, how many people listening will raise their hand and say they have, a problem with AEs and their partners entering data into Salesforce? Everyone, because it's this, it can feel like a big tax. It was one of the motivations for us to create Intellimize, where you had existing tools that did A/B testing that basically gave you info. It basically caused more work. You then had to go do something with it. Intellimize would go take the action directly on your behalf when you wanted it to, and net save you time. And that, those are some of the things that come to mind at conceptualization, rather than once you're out and running into the issue.
Yeah. Absolutely. So then I guess the next step from there. So then in 2005, you make the jump to Yahoo. Is Yahoo where it sounds like that's where the gears started cranking for what would become Intellimize? I think you also met your co-founder there. Is that right?
I did. I was very fortunate that TradeWeave was acquired and then went to Yahoo and met my co-founder running what at the time was the world's largest web hosting company, which is full circle now working for a website building, managing, and optimizing company. And we had a few 100,000 paying customers. We're fortunate to grow them to a couple of million through probably the biggest lesson in my career, which was about the customer being true north and finding the problem you're going to solve for them. When I joined, the job from the GM of the BU was, he said, hey, I was product manager at the time. Jin, my co-founder, was the engineering leader, and we were leading this team. And they said, hey, we have our roots in telecom. The game we're playing is to make more features findable. So I forget the number. We have 100 features, go make 200 features findable in a dashboard. Great. We turned the crank. We did that project. Then we went and spent some time getting to know our customers in more depth. We called them follow me homes, of course, with permission, but then go watch them in the office doing their day-to-day job beyond our product. First, there were moments of like, oh, crud. Like they have a yellow sticky attached to their monitor for this thing that's in the product right in front of them. Okay. And then we're like, wait a minute. Actually, we learned 40% of our customers are sole proprietors. 95% are 5 employees or fewer. They don't aspire to learn what we aspire to teach them. They don't want to learn the 200 or 100 features. In fact, their ideal product is to stick money in one end and get leads out the other. This is 04, 05, when building a website wasn't a given for a company. They just wanted to run their business. And so we literally did a 180 on the product. We took away choice. We built a highway through the product that was simple, opinionated, guided them because we had done this, they had not. And it was fortunately wildly successful. We grew from 50 million to 115 million in revenue in like 2.5, 3 years, all of which was based on the opposite of what we thought, of the game we thought we were playing. And that customer intimacy was the driver of that.
I mean, what a powerful lesson, and one many today can also probably feel. We get a lot of founders listening to this, and many, it can feel like you're one feature away from hyper growth, like all the time. You're like, oh, if we just build this thing and look at our customer base, and then 20% of them, if they adopt it, then look at all this money that we're gonna bring in. And I think that exercise of like really slowing down, this follow me home thing is hilarious. Would you actually go physically to their office and watch them for a day?
For a few hours we did, yes. And it was really eye-opening. At TradeWeave, before Yahoo, we had done some of that. I was very lucky to be married to our user. My wife was a buyer in retail. We were doing this for retail. And so literally in the middle of meetings, we'd be like, how does somebody do this? Yeah, we'd call the bat line. We'd be like, Monica's my wife. Monica, how do you do this thing? And we literally went to her office, saw maybe they were green screen terminals. Either way, they were very not what we have now, and watched her doing her thing. And we did the same thing at Yahoo. Yeah.
I love that. I'm trying to, there's no reason people wouldn't sign up for that today. Still, like if you're a happy customer at a software company and the leadership comes to you and says, hey, we want to make our product better for you. We want to intimately know your job. We've done interviews. We've had many discussions with you. Do you mind if we actually come in and watch you do your job? I bet a surprising amount of people would actually take you up on that. And I don't think I've ever heard someone actually doing that.
I think to tell them, to your point, we'd like you to influence our roadmap. We'd like you to influence how we frame our product. We'd like you to influence how we serve you, is sort of the explicit value exchange.
Yeah. Yeah. You also said something there that stood out to me, was this idea of building products that are opinionated, that have a point of view on, hey, we work with a lot of people that solve the problems that you're trying to solve every day. And we have, through extensive research and data, decided this is actually the best way to do something and the fastest path to the result. And I think for a long time, it was almost about giving complete control and customization in software, and like, hey, you can do things how you want to do it. And people were almost scared to have a point of view. And it feels like that is changing, and people want to be told, especially now with AI. People are feeling like a little bit lost, and how do I engage with this? How, from your years as a product leader, how did you think about creating a point of view when you're building software and making it have an opinion?
It really was thinking hard. As a marketer, I think the same thing. What's the job we're doing? That's it. It's really that simple. And then how do you optimize for that in your messaging, in your pitch, in the product itself, while leaving paths out? We used to call them trapdoors. I don't know why, but to complexity and control if you want it. And to your point, it's exactly what you said, Scott. We just have more reps at this, right? We've seen millions of these. You've seen a couple. If you would like our advice, we're happy to build it directly into the product. If you don't, no problem. You can have total control. But if you want, and most do, the other thing you made me think about, meta level, one level higher, is it does feel like there are generations of software in individual categories that go from, we're the super easy to use one. And then you add and you add and you add and you upsell, and it gets more expensive and you have more control. And then somebody comes to supplants with something really simple, and you go through that cycle
repeats,
over and over.
Bundling,
Yeah.
unbundling, bundling, unbundling. Yeah, totally. Um, and yeah, I like this idea of sort of have a point of view, have an opinion, guide them to the outcome they want with the least resistance, but then have these, you can choose your own adventure if you need to, and the complexity is there if needed. But we're not going to throw this complexity at you right off the jump.
100% in product and in marketing, you made me think now. I think this manifests as not creating your messaging or your website or your collateral by committee. It's so, I feel like, clear so many times when you say, oh, their homepage is 10 screens long, and you can see it was designed by committee because it's addressing all these different things, and it's not taking a stand on, we are for this persona, for this job to be done, and not for others, at least as our primary. It's not that the others don't exist, but we are clear this is the primary, and to be opinionated about that. And I am a believer that that is actually revenue optimizing rather than saying, oh, well, we can help you and you and you and you and you and you. For most startups, right? If you're Salesforce, it's a different thing. But if you're a startup, I think not doing that by committee and having the self-discipline, because you're like, yes, I can do all those other things. All those shiny objects, all that money sitting there is interesting. You'll make even more of it by being focused, in my humble opinion.
Totally agree. And this is going to be sort of a meta thing with this podcast. So we have ads on the podcast. We work with great sponsors on the podcast, and some of the coaching and learnings that we've had of when you try and be something to everyone, and you're like, oh, there's 50,000 people are going to listen to this. Like, tell them we're the best at everything in the data space or the engagement space or the enablement space. Then you don't resonate with anyone. And then we're trying to kind of like coach them in like, okay, you have to know how the market perceives you, because the market, you have a reputation, you have a brand already, and people kind of know that. And you might want to be something else, but like go to your data and tell us like your best performing customers that absolutely love you, and call those people out and just be very real with exactly who you serve, how you serve them, and when, in what scenario are you the best fit to solve that problem. And that can be a tough, almost humbling exercise to do, of like, okay, maybe this is where we want to go, but who actually are we right now, and who do we best serve right now?
I'm strongly with you. And I think the realization that regardless of what you've done, you do have a brand out there already. And then your choice is just what do you do with that perception is super wise.
Totally. Okay, continuing down your journey, you then spend 2 years at Twitter, now X, which is super cool to have that experience as head of global product and industry marketing. Maybe I'll switch this question up, and instead of kind of what did you maybe get right, is there things you did wrong while you were at Twitter, now X? Like if you could go back and change something about that time period?
One of the funnier ones, I had the privilege of joining when revenue was almost zero and there were 10 or 20 people in the ads business, and I was in the ads business. 3 years later, when I left around the IPO, we were at 650 million in revenue and there were 500 people in the ads business. I have
Holy shit.
never been part of growth like that. It was great to be along for that ride and contribute a
Wow.
very, very, very tiny piece of it.
So 0 to 650 mil in 3 years.
In 3 years. And that was
Wow.
Twitter, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but in fairness, it's really it's on the base of the company was already 400 people and was already, you talk about having a brand already. The biggest challenge we had in the early days of ads was, no, we're not just about what you had for lunch and your pets. Advertisers were like, you have commercial intent here. And we didn't think that's what they would be thinking. They made it really clear that's what they were thinking. They made it really clear that's the brand we had. And we had to lean into our strengths and help them understand, no, there is commercial intent here. You can, and try to shift perception of the brand.
How did you go about shifting that? So what were some of the strategies you used to shift how the market was perceiving you?
3 come to mind. Because this was enterprise ads at the time, right? This wasn't self-serve SMB yet. That was a couple of years later. in person, literally talking to people. We also hired a bunch of people who had relationships there, from agencies, from other ad tech companies. That was part of it. A second was data. To be clear, hey, while you perceive, Twitter's brand perception was that's in what I had for lunch. You, dear brand, you have a brand out there already. I'm going to make it up, right? 5 million people mentioned Coca-Cola yesterday. I'm making that up. But they would have been like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was the case. And here are some of the things that they said. And so they would say, oh, okay. Or, 5 million people mentioned Pepsi. Why don't you go after them, Coca-Cola? Or mention something else that you could be adjacent to. And the last was to help people visualize how they could bring it to life themselves. So some of the most successful work at that stage, now it's old hat, but at that stage, what did we call it? Native advertising it didn't exist, right? It was either search or display. That was it. Mobile was a kind of advertising back then. And to help people understand this is how you can use organic and paid together and bringing stories to life. The team published a little book of just examples of insightful tweets, witty tweets. That I don't know if you remember, Oreo did something around the Super Bowl lights going out. At that time, that was genuinely innovative. You would talk about that at A&A Masters. Now that's old hat. But at the time, helping people visualize that was really inspirational.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did you, as owning the kind of product marketing function, and this ad org is just blowing up? I imagine you saw do you remember roughly how many sellers that was in the ad business? Once you start getting closer to the 650 mil?
I remember the whole org was 500. I don't remember how many of those were AEs, but big chunk of that. Also had a mid. So I remember there were 3 tiers by size of company. If memory serves me correctly, there were at least 2, and I believe we had SDRs doing demand gen, several hundred, and globally. It was a truly global org. I had and hired people in San Francisco, New York, Sao Paulo, Tokyo, London, and there were AEs in all those places and a whole bunch more.
Wow. How did you keep? I always think when you go through hypergrowth like that, one of the hardest things is just disseminating information, which is funny, the thinking of Twitter, because that's kind of what it does, allows you to disseminate information quickly. But you have to keep all of these AEs up to date on latest pricing, packaging, how we're talking about it, messaging, positioning. How were you able to do that as you're expanding so rapidly?
To your point, the field enablement part of marketing was a huge amount of work, and fortunately, the team had huge, incredible goals in front of it. I remember one year the Super Bowl was perennially the biggest day of the year because you get more traffic, so you'd sell more ads. And I remember one Super Bowl, they said, this was great. You should be really excited about this. By the way, Q4 has 90 days in it. We need to do 90 Super Bowls to hit our Q4 number. And so the ramp was just bananas. Fortunately, that resulted in that. I think that and the sales leadership created a culture where folks really wanted to know. They really did care to know. I've worked in other organizations where the sales team was less about that, and it was simpler, right? When I was at Yahoo, the surface area of ads they had to sell was enormous. At Twitter, it was really focused at that point in time. Adam Bain, who ran the whole ads business, also was extraordinarily good. I learned a bunch from him, watching him as the org scaled. Where did he invest his time? What did he make himself available for? What level of thing did he begin to delegate? But where did he choose to remain deep? You could talk to him, when we're at 600 million in revenue, he knew the state of every single very large deal, every person, every state, everything. He just had an encyclopedic memory for it. He didn't know that about every single deal, but he knew it for every large one while managing overall. It was an extraordinary leader.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so you said one. Where did he choose to spend his time? So one was any larger deals, he would make sure he knows about them. Where else would he make sure that he was involved in?
it was watching him, when there were 20 of us, we just got stuff done. When there were 500 of us, right, there was an EA managing time. There were multiple layers. There were groups doing things separately that he would then go do in all hands and give, context on. It was that kind of scaling that I think he did really effectively. And he I think, did a very nice job building the personal connection, even when the touch points by necessity became less because the org is bigger. I think he was gifted at that, as many sales leaders are.
Yeah, I love it. Do you have any thoughts, opinions on the evolution of Twitter now, X and Elon taking over? Any thoughts? I've heard it's doing extremely well.
I don't have any good ones, so I'll keep them to myself.
Okay, sounds good. Well, we'll plead the fifth on that one. All right, so completing the journey, you then go to Brightroll, which I imagine was kind of this full circle moment because you got acquired by Yahoo, your old company. And then, you go all in and you've spent the last 9 years building Intellimize, and now part of Webflow, which, is an incredibly successful exit, what many founders, aspire to do. 9 years, that's a long time, especially in startup land. I think it's kind of like dog years, I think. So it's a long time. What was the hardest part of that journey?
The first thing that comes to mind is the existential threat, dread, fight or flight that felt perpetual. Didn't matter how much money. We could have $50 million in the bank. I still felt existential dread all the time. And candidly, while I know that it's a whole bunch of people who are making thoughtful bets in a risky business trying to go make things work, I felt it very personally on people betting their careers on this and, on the executive team, the founding team, on me. And no, I know it's not all about me or the executive team or the founding team at all, but I felt that weight a lot. And so, thought about all the families when I thought about that existential dread. Just a sense of team and camaraderie and care and responsibility, and just that weighed on me the most when you think about hard things. And it surprised me the week after the acquisition closed, my shoulders went down a little bit, and I didn't know they were up. Right, I thought I was at equilibrium, and I didn't know they were up in that way. And when I reflected on what was it, it was specifically that. Right, there are a whole bunch of other things to think about and worry about at work and push hard on, but that one had changed.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to talk about. And anytime you're doing really, really hard things, going after a crazy goal or trying to build a big business, that you feel a responsibility to do well because people have believed in you, comes with sacrifice and trade-off. And oftentimes it's this feeling of great weight and great pressure. If you were to do it again, is that just part of the deal? Is there any ways that you found to combat that along the way, or is it unfortunately just part of the gig?
I recognize every person is different. Every person has their own journey. I think for my little journey, it totally is part of the gig, and that the antidotes or the at least symptom, I wouldn't say relievers, but decreasers are recognizing that it's valid to take care of yourself, to be kind to yourself when something doesn't go the way you wanted it to. If you gave it your all, if you did everything you knew possibly how to do, to find peers to talk to, and compare notes with fellow travelers. And lastly, I think the next time around, I thought through that previous experience that we talked about in the beginning, that I had a pretty clear point of view and learned along the way, hey, very few things matter. I think even fewer matter next time around. There were some things that I would be like, oh, we really need to get that right. And you know what? I'm not sure if we do next time around. Like it can be the 80% is good enough. And I've always been a believer for a long, long time that, perfect is the enemy of good. So that wasn't the problem, nor was the problem, oh, I need to hold on to that. I don't want to let go. Like that wasn't it either. It was it's important to get that one right. And I think I believed that about more things than I should have, even though I believed it about very few things. So I think that helps with some of the existential dread.
Yeah, I like that. The focus can be a superpower, cutting up the noise. Company building in specific, let's say you go and do this again. What are the areas you can't miss at? The small few things that you need to get right.
I heard someone say, and it feels very germane. They said, first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution. I see you smiling. You've heard that one before too.
It's in our deck, baby. It's in our fundraising deck. Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's like our core belief, that especially now more than ever with like technology moats kind of disappearing, it's easier to build than ever before. Your last true moat is kind of execution and distribution, for sure. So I'm a huge fan of that quote.
I love tying execution to it where, I remember early on thinking ourselves and then watching others be like, I need to keep this idea to myself. And you realize, no, you don't. It's because the execution is, 98% of it. In almost every case, you don't need to keep it to yourself. Distribution. And then, as you said, and then just being relentless on product market fit, which I think is associated, and it gets at that core, what's the problem we're solving? And people. It is absurdly, incredibly tempting to make a hire more quickly because by definition, if you're hiring somebody, you're suffering because there's more work to do. So you need to bring on somebody on board. And then waiting longer to find the right person makes the suffering even longer. I waited and did that longer, in particular for the executive team. A couple members of my board gave me a really hard time about it. And that I would do again. I would do again that way. But I think those are the very few things that matter.
Yeah, I love it. And I believe that's Justin Kahn quote, the CEO founder of Twitch. So we'll give him his credit where credit is due. And I love it. Well, I got to ask the opposite of that question. What was the most rewarding part now looking back?
The thing that fed my soul wasn't making a quarter or even a customer getting up on stage and saying nice things, which I told the company and believed myself. That's true north. Customers saying nice things about us on stage. The thing that fed my soul was people joining and 2 weeks later being like, thank you. You weren't lying about the culture. I can just go and run here. And that made me very, very happy because I think culture is one of the very few things that flows from the top. And to create an environment where people get to do their life's best work is an incredible privilege and incredibly rewarding.
Hell yeah. Absolutely no better feeling than that. Couldn't agree more. Sophie, Paul, and us in this little Vancouver office, there's nothing more, rewarding than, seeing them just absolutely crush it and love what they're doing and just get out of the way and let them cook. Let them cook. They're doing great work. So I love that. All right, I want to quickly go to a founder question as we sort of wrap up. A couple more questions for you. This one's super interesting and something I'm actually quite curious about myself. There's been a lot of asks recently from founders in our portfolio. The question is, as a startup founder, what's the best way to build relationships with PR outlets, reporters, and analysts?
I think it begins with choosing your targets thoughtfully. It's going to be rare that you're big enough to be general business like Wall Street Journal. Chances are much better you should focus on industry-specific folks. Then is it your customer's industry? Is it your industry? And then to think, okay, well, I probably can't get the very top tier to begin. Maybe you can. Maybe you've got the relationships. Maybe you can. One, two, to very much look at it as a long-term relationship, just like with investors, right? Not transactional. And to the extent you can be a resource for them, recognize that their time is incredibly valuable, but try to be helpful every interaction you have. Three, recognize what's newsworthy to you is almost certainly not equal to what's newsworthy to them. Because they have a zillion other founders talking about their fundraising. There was one point where we raised money, and I forget who it was. Maybe it was TechCrunch, maybe it was VentureBeat, maybe it was the Journal. Someone was like, unless it's $100 million, like we don't want to cover it right now. I'm like, great, that's your bar right now. Chances are very low your individual feature launches are newsworthy.
Or your new integration, probably not. Yeah.
Yes. And to like then make it more newsworthy by doing your homework, like really fully read what they wrote, read their hypotheses in market. Does that align with some of the stories you want to tell in market so that there is a fit there? And when you do that, then be super clear as you're preparing to talk with them and talking with them. What do you want to say? Have it down to 2 to 3 points that you want to make sure they remember, that ideally that message gets pulled through, and then have ready, in my humble opinion, plenty of reactive Q&A in case they take you down other areas, and be also really clear about areas you're not going to go. Like we did not want to talk about the ethics of AI. We have a point of view, but that's not what the company's about. It wouldn't help the company's brand to go there. And then practice bridging from one thing to another, or deflecting entirely when you're like, I don't want to talk about that thing. And the last thing that comes to mind is if you don't have the relationships, find a good agency that does. And in my humble opinion, good equals you can see that they've worked with this reporter a bunch or this author a bunch, and they can tell you, they have a point of view at your level of sophistication, right? If you're a PR pro, then they're talking to you there. If you're PR new, they're talking to you there about what this individual needs to see. It's a bunch of things, but I think it's a real effort. It's not like, I don't think it's worth doing it lightly. I think you either go all in and make this an investment or not. Otherwise, you're sort of yelling into the wind. How does all that land for you?
I think it's fantastic advice. Yeah, it's one of my recent learnings is just how relationship based it truly is. I think there's for maybe a while, or people just got disoriented, or it's not quite the right word, but it seemed like it was more pay to play than it is. And I'm learning these are long term relationships that you have to build, particularly with analysts and reporters. And I think your advice of, okay, you can have aspirational outlets, but why don't you start with, very industry specific, could be communities, could be small, even like newsletters. Sometimes there's highly influential people that, your buyers look to that could act as sort of a V1 PR, for you for these different releases that you have. So that's good stuff. Final two questions, and they're always the same. I keep them intentionally vague, so you can highlight something we already talked about or do something totally new. First question is, what is one widely held belief that founders hold to be true today that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
I think the lore that you have to say goodbye to your friends and family for 5 years to do a startup, it's just not true. I actually think it produces worse business outcomes. And I say this as someone who, first startup, TradeWeave, where I was employee one, was .com one, and I actually track my time because it helps me allocate it in the right place. I averaged 80 hours a week for a couple of years, peaked at 135. That's not the like screwing around time. That's like work. Total self-actualization. Like it was incredible. I think I got a lot more done at Intellimise. I still work well over 40 hours a week, but it's not like that. I know my wife, I know my two daughters well, and am in their lives regularly. And I think getting a full night's rest, which I measure with this, which is a Oura ring, like that feedback loop, I think causes me to make a bunch of better decisions. Maybe I ran more steps in those 80 hours, but the percentage of time that I was like, oh, crud, I didn't need to run those steps at all, I'm heading in the wrong direction, was so much higher then than now. I do think that belief is just not right.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a bit of like learnings from, I think it's awesome that you track your time. 135 hours a week is insane, by the way. But I imagine, and this is probably good advice for a lot of the founders listening, is like, you tracking your time, I bet you could see what times you were most effective, what areas you were working on in the business that produced the outcomes you wanted. And then like over time, I imagine that just made you more efficient with what you were spending your time on too.
It was very helpful. And the notion of tracking your time sounds incredibly burdensome and like a lot of overhead. And I found a way, if anyone else does, I'd like find the way that's right for you that takes no cognitive load, feels automatic, and don't care about accuracy. The point is not to be accurate to the minute. The point is to know the overall trends. And I found it particularly useful as a founder because the job sometimes is whatever needs doing. And so the needs would shift so dramatically week on week. And so I'd say to myself, oh, I needed to spend 40% of this week on recruiting. Did I? No. Oh, I need to spend 40% of the week helping the sales team. Did I? No. And to like have that intellectual integrity and feedback loop was really, really valuable. And then for knowing during the day, I must admit the ring was really helpful there, where it could quantitatively tell you you've got more energy at this time of day and less at this time of day. And so I do more strategic thinking here and more rote execution here.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Great advice. I think I got to get one of those Aura rings. I've seen them on too many people, and everyone seems to love them. So I think it might be a holiday purchase for me. Final question, and thank you for spending the time, Guy. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Final question is sort of the silver bullet question. Everyone's looking for things they can implement today that are actually working. What is one go-to-market tactic strategy that is actively working for you today at Telemize and Webflow?
There's a whole bunch that were working to drive demand are not anymore right now, and that changes all the time. One thing that we are finding helpful is small group events, dinners with senior people where we're not pitching, where we are creating community for them to connect. And often afterwards, they'd be like, I expected you to pitch me. Can I learn a little bit more about that? We have found a good use of time, and I don't know of any silver bullets. If you know of one, please share.
I love it. Well, the executive dinners, no pitch is as close to my silver bullet as well. It worked super well for us at Outreach. It works at the fund, works for our partners.
It's incredible you doing it at the fund. Those are amazing events.
Thank you. Yeah, and they're awesome. Just everyone wins. The attendees get to learn and network, and sponsors get to build new connections, and we get to talk to our LPs and our founders. So yeah, definitely bake that into your 2025 marketing strategy if it's not already. And you can partner with people. You can bring costs down. They can be incredibly efficient, a kind of marketing spend. Anyway, Guy, you're the man. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and you've had such an incredible career, and it was great to get to spend some time and kind of dissect it with you. If people want to follow your journey, want to get in touch, are you an X guy from your time at Twitter, LinkedIn? What's the best way to follow your journey and see what might be coming next?
Would love to connect on LinkedIn. That is a great place to get together and continue the conversation. And Scott, thanks for having me. It's an awesome conversation. Enjoyed it a bunch.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate you. And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in this week. I say it every week, but listening's one thing, executing something totally different. Hopefully we gave you some ideas, tactics, strategies that you can go implement into your own organization. And we'll see you all next week.